Hey, Abby, you are our composer in residence. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet me and talk a little bit about our next I&I concert.
My pleasure, James.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit some questions about that specific concert of ours and have also your input about some of the pieces we are doing there. And what I found really interesting and that I haven't had experience with before is that as composer in residence, you are also here in charge of our composer program, our composer fellowship, which means that you get to mentor young composers. And when you mentor fellows, you essentially they are not quite students anymore. Is that right? They have already studied composition, so they are they have a quite strong personality musically, I would think. And so the composer that we are going to have, the fellow that we're going to have on this concert is Fish Yu. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask you how it's been to, how do you work with these composer fellows and, for example, to prepare them for this kind of concerts?
Yeah, sure. Well, we do have an older position, and those older composers typically write for the main stage. And then our younger composer, who's 25 or under, in this case it's Fish, writes for Intimate and Immersive. So Fish is actually still in school. He's doing his doctorate at University of Toronto, where some of the older composers may have graduated already. But I mean, already at that stage, he definitely has a musical personality. He's already really strongly versed in digital media and electronics. And so, I really let him do his thing. Also because he is actually studying with a composer. He's studying with Canadian composer Gary Kulesha. So I am mentoring him, but I'm a little bit hands off. So he comes to me with a draft, and then we talk through some considerations. I'll also really be looking at his parts. Right. So each of the individual parts that the musicians play, he has to create. So for orchestra, we have orchestra standards and just have to make sure those are absolutely perfect, because those types of things, students don't spend time learning in school. It's just about the craft and not about the practical part of it. And so we really focus on the practical here. Even public speaking, I'll be going through his speech with him.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes.
Oh, wow. That's
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, and all the editing of his piece, all of those behind the scenes things that aren't just composition.
Okay, well, that's really interesting. So you are essentially, a big part of your job is that you are really preparing him for the professional life and really the professional aspect of being a composer today.
Very much, yeah, because composers have to do public speaking in a variety of ways. We have to do education and community outreach, and of course there's nothing about that in school. So that's a big part of it. And also just making sure that we have a really professional, polished presentation of our music.
Okay. So it's really different than the study when they are at school learning compositions and having these theory lessons. This is really the step after.
The step afterwards, exactly. It's the step to being professional. But for some of our younger composers that might not still be in school, I might take a more hands-on approach and be looking at their music a lot more. So it just depends on the composer.
All right. Yeah. So if we think in practice, let's say we know that we are going to perform this young composer, our fellow, in an intimate and immersive concert. So once we have decided that, what happens in practice for him to sort of, do we tell him, okay, you can compose, you have how much time you want, then do we let him do really whatever he wants, or do we try to guide him a little bit? And I'm talking before we get to these really technical aspects of making the parts. What's the nature of your work relation between the moment where we ask him to compose something and the moment we get to the final stages?
Well, first of all, hopefully this chosen composer would come to a previous intimate and immersive concert. So they see exactly what they're getting. They know that there's an artist creating work in response to their music. They see how close the audience is. They see other composers introducing their pieces. They see that there's generally a concept for the concert, and then they can find find their way within that. So he knew, the time of year, the instrumentation. He also, in his application, requested to use electronics, which is a bit unusual for us. So we said, sure, as long as you handle the electronics. And then, from there, he came up with a concept and spoke that through with me. And then he provided several drafts along the way. So he'll send me his score and a recording, sort of computer-generated recording, and then we talk through that. We might get together with our other composer fellows and listen and follow along with the score and just make sure that he is writing music which is really aligned with his concept, that it's all, that his communication is very, very clear. There may be a few little technical things in here about instrumentation, but a lot of it is just making sure that he's getting the message across that he wants to.
And on the same program, we have some other pieces as well, but we also have a new piece from you. Is that right?
Yes, it's new. So it started out earlier this year for accordion and string quartet, and I'm changing it to be accordion and string orchestra. So we will be premiering that version. This one is actually autobiographical. So when I was young, I was deaf. And this piece is really about that. I wrote about this for the first time. So the first movement is really sort of isolated and feeling like I'm alone. This takes the role of the accordion here. And then there's a few sort of strange echoes from the strings, almost like this inner world from me as a child. And then the other movements, they emerge from that world because I got my hearing back by moving to Canada, interestingly.
Really?
Because all the dry climate in Calgary dried up all of this scar tissue.
Okay.
So I was completely deaf, and then I got my hearing back within 6 months.
That's incredible. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is when I was 6 years old. So
All right.
this is a memory. I mean, it's obviously not really a literal thing. It's just really what I remember. And so, the rush of all of the colors and feeling like I was sort of part of the world again is part of this piece. And it's called Bloom, really to reflect that.
And I suspect that therefore this was not only a very important moment in your life for this physical reason, but also because I assume this might have been a moment that has created or ignited your love for music, since you might have discovered it in many ways for the first time. Definitely.
And, when I was deaf, it wasn't a quiet world. There were things going on in my head. And I remember being at doctor's offices because I was allowed to come to Canada if I was declared clinically deaf with no hope of recovery. So I had to go and see a number of specialists.
Okay.
And I would hear these things in my head, and they said, push the button when you hear something. I was always pushing the button. I hear these sounds, yet, in reality, there was absolutely nothing there. And so this first movement plays on this, the feeling that I was going through with the accordion, and then these inner sounds, which are like the string orchestra.
Really interesting. And these inner sounds that then you wrote in the orchestra did you try to transcribe a little bit what you might have heard back then in your mind, or is it more...
It was too long ago, but I remember there's sort of high-pitched kind of electronic kind of sounds. Yeah.
And
I mean, certainly I have such an appreciation of sound and music, and surely it comes from it being absent for a while. Yeah.
So this piece is also very, even more important in the sense that it really focuses on a moment in your life that has been so defining.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, all right. Well, that's really interesting, and I'm really curious myself as a conductor to sort of discover that that very specific sound that you are trying to convey, and I'm actually really curious also to really discover about that and get some impression of what might have been going on in your head back then.
And it works with the idea of a concerto, because the solo, which is me in my own world, versus the ensemble, which is the rest of the world. So that's really why I decided to write for that concept.
Right. And could you also tell us something about the other piece on the program, one of the other pieces on the program we have, which is Gold Leaf?
Yeah, Gold Leaf by Linda Catlin Smith. She's a Toronto composer, and I'm so pleased she's going to be out with us for the performance. So she wrote a piece that she compares it to a painting. So sometimes there's sort of heavy paint and a lot of color, and other times it's transparent. And she uses the percussion, she said, like a dusting, almost like gold leaf. And I think there's a hint of the seasons in here, like we have in some of the other pieces on the concert, because she says she finished it in August. That's just when the leaves were starting to turn golden. So this is a beautiful piece, and I'm so happy she'll be joining us.
Right.
And we have another piece on the concert too, right, by a Colombian composer?
Yeah, exactly. A Colombian composer who's working mostly in France, whom I had the pleasure to meet last year. Her name is Violeta Cruz.
Yeah.
And this is a piece that I have already conducted in France called Virvol. Virvol is a hard word to translate. In French, it means something like flying away. And it's a piece that is about the wind, and which is very interesting because it's trying to sort of show this impression of the wind and how it's something that we can't touch, but everybody feels it, and we also can't see it. And the interesting thing about the piece is that some of the musicians will be standing and moving around the hall playing at the same time. So they have sort of devices in their ears that tells them what to play. So it's very interesting from a sensory point of view for the audiences. So I'm really looking forward to conducting all those pieces and see how our audiences like it. And I think they will sort of really like the eclectic aspect of this program.
A lot of pieces about the senses.
Exactly. All right. Well, great. Thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to the concert and to discovering both your pieces, your piece Bloom and Fisch's new composition as well.
That's called The Breath of Spring, by the way. All
right.
about the transition from winter to spring.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, James.